Hello, hello. Welcome back to the P2P Soap Box. As always, I'm your host and P2P BFF, Marcy Maxwell, the Managing Director of the Peer-to-Peer Professional Forum. I am excited to dig into another hot topic today with one of my long-term P2P buddies. For most nonprofit organizations, gone are the days of a single peer-to-peer initiative. Especially considering the impact of the recent pandemic, it is no secret to any of us that expanding your P2P portfolio is going to be critical for your long-term growth and your sustainability as an organization. By diversifying these revenue streams, not only can you raise more funds, but you can attract new supporters, foster a more inclusive community, and ultimately reduce your financial risk of having a singular initiative. The challenge often lies in determining the right timing and the right approach for this expansion. Is your organization seeking to engage a specific audience? Are you planning to scale an existing program into new communities? Or are you introducing an entirely new initiative? Do you do it now or do you wait for a whole nother fiscal year to pass? Ultimately, successful expansion hinges on prioritizing all of those elements, the audience, the activity, the timing, all in a way that aligns with your organization's mission and goals. I am so happy to be joined today by a member of our peer-to-peer community who is living through such a program expansion as we speak. Robyn Mendez is a veteran of our industry who currently serves as the Associate Vice President of Legacy and National Events at City of Hope. City of Hope is one of the largest and most advanced cancer research and treatment organizations in the U.S. and one of the leading research centers for diabetes and other life-threatening illnesses. City of Hope's growing national system includes its Los Angeles campus, a network of clinical care locations across Southern California, a new cancer center in Orange County, California, and cancer treatment centers and outpatient facilities in the Atlanta, Chicago, and Phoenix areas. This expansion of the hospital's mission into new communities provided the perfect impetus for expanding its signature walk program, Walk for Hope, from a single event in Los Angeles to 6 locations in 2024. So during our conversation today, Robyn will share her team's decision-making framework for this expansion of their signature program. We'll dig into the importance of setting clear expectations, both with internal leadership and the local communities, plus the budget and staffing implications of launching into new markets. We'll also discuss her team's lessons learned from year 1 of this expansion and what they're taking with them into year 2 and beyond. Plus, tapping into her years of experience in the world of peer-to-peer, Robyn will share some additional insights and alternate considerations for growing your peer-to-peer portfolios. So let's dive right into my conversation with my friend, City of Hope's Robyn Mendez. Robyn, welcome to the P2P Soap Box. So happy to have you.
Oh, thank you, Marcy. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
This is going to be fun. So full transparency, Robyn and I have known each other for many, many years, but really through the peer-to-peer forum, through conferences and, late nights at the hotel bar during the conferences as well.
I really think that's a cool testament to the community that this type of activity has brought together. I've got so many friends that I've made throughout the years in this industry, at the peer-to-peer forum, at different events. And so it's nice to see that we're building communities in our own little worlds, but we also have our own community that we can rely upon, which is really nice.
I know a little bit about your background, but why don't you, for our listeners, tell us a little bit about your personal, professional journey that led you to your role at City of Hope?
Yeah, happy to. So, the majority of my career has been spent in the tech sector. So, many of you probably know me from my time at Convio/Blackbaud. But I've also worked for several nonprofits, including Susan G. Komen on the Race for the Cure back in the day. I also worked with the National MS Society on the MS 150. And I worked for MD Anderson, helping them to build their boot walk to end cancer. So that's kind of what's led me to City of Hope, where, again, another cancer hospital, helping them to establish a national event series around their walk that originally just took place in Los Angeles.
Your team recently made the decision to expand the City of Hope Walk for Hope, which has been around for years, but was just a single market event in LA. And you've decided to expand it to a more national or somewhat regional, but national footprint. So let's talk about what went into the thinking behind that decision, the decision to expand. What factors were considered? How'd your team get buy-in? Because that is a significant change going from one market to multi-market.
So, thankfully, it was in the larger vision of the hospital. So, as some background, I've been in this role for about a year, and prior to my hiring, City of Hope acquired the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, which had hospitals based in Phoenix, Chicago, and Atlanta. We had been shifting them from a for-profit model into a nonprofit model. And so in the context of peer-to-peer, what that meant is they were sponsoring everybody else's nonprofit events in their community. So Cancer Treatment Centers of America would sponsor the Pancrean Walk. They would sponsor Relay for Life. They would sponsor all of these local events. And now that they are moving into a nonprofit model, we have had to help them understand that now we're fundraising for ourselves. We're not fundraising for other organizations. Sorry to those other organizations that are on this call or on the podcast right now. And so that was a big change. So what ended up happening is when I started, we had already rebranded all of those Cancer Treatment Centers of America hospitals into the City of Hope branding nomenclature. We were in the process of rolling out very early stage philanthropy to these three markets. And what ended up happening was in conjunction with Giving Tuesday, we had an employee event that took place physically at each site. And it was very clear from our employee base that they had a hunger for the walk. They were so excited to hear what we were doing in Los Angeles. And they were like, when are you coming here? And when we said 2025, you could see the face drop and the sadness in our staff's eyes. And so originally the plan was we were going to expand to a secondary site in the LA market. So we were moving into Orange County. And as a result of the feedback from our employees at this employee event, I made a proposal to our leadership that we go ahead and just rip the Band-Aid off and have a smaller version of the Walk for Hope in our regional offices or in our regional hospitals in Chicago, Atlanta, and Phoenix.
That is the dream, right? To go into a market where there is actual enthusiasm as opposed to going in and just looking at it and saying, okay, this is where we're going to go. And we hope the people will come. But going into it and knowing you at least have some initial advocates and champions in the market.
It's interesting, though. I think we're about 2 weeks away from our walk right now, just to give the listeners a line of sight. So this will be my very first walk. I've learned a lot in the last month, watching the numbers come in, watching the money come in. And, having a staff base is a luxury and it is very nice. But I think what we're learning, and this is comparable to what other folks would be experiencing if they were expanding into a market, staff fundraising is different. And internal fundraising is different than external fundraising. And really, we have learned as we've gone through this process that we need to lean more heavily on the external market than I think we had planned on doing this year. And so the plan as we head into next year. And one of the things that we've really learned is the importance of, ironically, going back to the idea of community, the importance of volunteer leadership in markets, that your staff cannot drive this on their own. It has to be driven by passionate volunteers in the community. We've really learned that we're going to have a great year this year, but next year, as we're looking at 2025, really, I think building out those committees and those volunteers in market are going to be critical to the long-term growth and the sustainability of this expansion into these other places.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like we can continue to unpack all your lessons learned from year one. But so I want to talk a little bit more about kind of getting to this year one, right? So, it's very easy to say, we're going to expand our program. Not always easy to actually do that from a logistics standpoint operationally. So you kind of already shared about how you chose some of the markets. How did you dig into goal setting and budgeting and kind of setting those expectations for your leadership team? And let's talk about, you mentioned volunteers and staffing. How did you kind of set the framework for staffing these new events as well?
Yeah, well, I will say it's been tough. I don't believe that we're staffed probably the way that we should be at this moment. And again, we've learned a lot going through the process of that first year. So the way we approached it at the beginning of the season is we knew that the external hospitals did not have the staff to manage this. They were already running a very lean shop. They had no philanthropy staff at all. So there were no in-market fundraising professionals. But what we ask of them is, if you can help us with promotion of the event within the community, so basically like signage and that sort of thing, and if you can help us to drive fundraising with the staff that work inside the hospital, we would be willing to invest the resources to bring the walk to your community. So the first thing we had to do before we decided to move forward was to just agree that this is how National was going to come in and help support. And this is what the local market had to commit to bring in order for this thing to be successful. We knew we couldn't do it on our own without staff, but we also knew that the staff didn't have the bandwidth to do things like work with the city on permits and closing down the streets and doing kind of the more logistical, tactical aspects of the walk. We also knew they didn't have the resources to do the marketing collateral. So we took ownership of all of that. So we're managing communications nationally and locally. We are managing the logistical build out of the event. We're providing direct one-on-one customer support to anybody who needs help in market. And that's to participants, not just to the staff. So I think that's a good thing to note. So yeah, that was the thought process as we were kind of heading into this. I think, again, what we learned is we have to have somebody in market to help us with building those volunteer relationships. We've got some, but it's just not at the level of depth that I would want to have with the people who are actually doing the fundraising on the ground in the market.
And I think, I have definitely in my career been a part of kind of expanding a program, bringing it to new markets. And I think there's a lot that goes into that first year market, right? Mm-hmm. Especially when you've had a program that's been successful for a long time. And I think sometimes there are assumptions that, well, we know how to do this really well in, city number one. So when we go to city number two, we're obviously going to do just as well as we did in city number one, instead of understanding that you're basically starting fresh, right? You're starting over in a brand new market. And I think that is from setting revenue goals and kind of your expectations, your awareness, but also with your volunteers. I think with walks, one of the things that's great is we've always said it's such a general market, general audience event. Anybody can participate. And I think there have been some organizations, I think, that see it as, well, then this is a great introduction into a community, is come out to this event. But then sometimes you plant an event in a community that has no awareness of who you are. And so you are kind of going in without that volunteer base. And so it's definitely a little bit of chicken and the egg. Like, what do you need first? Do you need the event to build awareness, or do you need the volunteers to build the event? And it's this cycle. So what have you seen with some of your experience, again, with budgeting, with setting those goals and getting to know some of those new cities?
So from a budgeting perspective, we really approached the new markets as we're not going to make money here. Like, we need to plan from a financial standpoint.
That is hard as a fundraiser. That is a very hard investment of time and energy as a fundraiser, for sure.
Well, it's an investment in a long-term commitment to a community. So, as we're thinking about this, we do have a long-term strategy. So, those of you who have been in peer-to-peer know, second-year fundraisers raise 2 to 3 times what first-year fundraisers will bring in. And so when you're new to market, everyone is a first-year fundraiser. So you can't bank on it, but you can make some pretty logical projections that whatever you raise this year, you are likely, if you do a good job on event day and you do a good job nurturing those relationships of the walkers that come, that they'll come back in year 2 and they'll hopefully, I wouldn't double my budget in terms of fundraising, but I mean, the people who come back are hopefully going to raise at least twice as much as they did the previous year. So we looked at it as an investment in year 1. That was also part of what influenced us deciding to just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off and go into market. The conversation around, let's get our staff motivated and get year 1 under the staff's belt so that they can become our advocates in market as we head into year 2 was absolutely part of the strategy as we were working through how we wanted to go about these events.
Well, and I think any staff person who has gone through an event for the first time, I mean, whether it's a brand new event or it's just new to you, you always know that year 2, your brain is already spinning of, either I didn't know I needed to do this and now I know that I do, or I should have spent more time here, or, oh gosh, your mind just cycling with ideas of what am I going to do in the next year? And again, we talk year 1 and year 2. I had an old industry friend. She was a believer in the power of year 0, which was, if it's a year like what you're describing, like this is just, we're ripping the Band-Aid, we're just starting, we do hope to raise money, but it may not, like thinking of it as year 0, kind of helped level set those expectations a little bit as well. So.
And I think I'll be transparent. I'm so fortunate. The leadership at City of Hope understands that this is a long haul model, that we're not going to, they weren't even surprised when we were like, we're not even planning on this being profitable in these markets. We're expecting for our primary site in Los Angeles and our Orange County site, which many of the people who are walking in Orange County are very familiar with the Los Angeles event because it's in the same geographic area. And historically, because we'd only had one event, they would drive to Duarte to participate in that event. So now we're just in their backyard, and it's a lot easier for the people who live in, the southern part of LA to participate. So we relied on those 2 events to kind of carry the whole season, if you will, of programs that'll be taking place across the country.
As of this recording, you're still kind of in the middle of this campaign, right? The walk in LA is a few weeks away. Some of the walks in some of the other communities are a little bit further out. What else are you learning in this, call it year 0, call it year 1, whichever you want to do, that's helping you shape kind of the future of this expanded program?
Well, I've already mentioned the importance of volunteer leadership. I know that's a buzzword and people are talking a lot about community, but it's real. When I think back on, I've been working in this space for almost 25 years, probably shouldn't acknowledge that. But when I look at those programs that have really just skyrocketed and done amazing fundraising, there's always this undercurrent of volunteerism with those programs, especially those that have kind of stayed on top for a significant amount of time. And so, I think we're definitely learning that we need to do a better job of pulling in our volunteers and empowering them to really own the event and make it theirs. We also have learned a lot about allowing the markets to own, and this is related, but a little different. Because National was sourcing all the marketing, some of that local flair got lost. And so I think one thing we've also learned is the importance of giving each community a little bit of freedom to kind of personalize and customize the walk into their own market. One example of that is when we were setting dates, there was a discussion around, hey, let's have every walk on the exact same date. This actually was a huge point of debate internally. And we wanted to do that. And when we first started, that was the plan. And we realized the moment we started talking to leadership in these markets, the idea of a Sunday event in Noonan, Georgia was absolutely unacceptable because it conflicted with church. And that was a deal breaker, not just for like the community, but for the people that work at the hospital. Like, church is an important part of their community. And so having a Sunday morning event that conflicted with church was a deal breaker for them. So we ended up moving several of the events from a Sunday to a Saturday, where that's not a big deal, not as big of a deal in the LA market. So you just learn things about these different parts of the country that make them unique and interesting in all of these amazing ways, and that we need to adapt in order to help make that event in that market more successful.
Absolutely. I can think of times when we, at different points in my career, we were trying to kind of force a specific date, and whether it was church or it was the college football game is happening, there's a home football game that day. And even, you think about things like that, and that seems like, oh, but not everybody's a football fan. But what we learned was there was some communities, they would not allow a permit for an event that would require any type of police support or closing down of streets, because their resources were committed to the onslaught of people that were descending upon the city for the really large college football game. So it wasn't just this silly notion in the South of, the joke is that you can't get married during SEC football season if you live in the South. So it wasn't this notion just of nobody will come because football is so important. It was this idea of the city is not going to allow this to happen. And so therefore we're going to be at a disadvantage. And so I think as you're expanding into new markets, those little things that maybe you wouldn't have thought of when it was just one market is such a unique consideration.
Well, and I can give you another example that we had to tackle as it relates to dates. It snows in Chicago by Halloween. I live in Texas. It snows never. Like, having an event in November, like, I was like, yeah, that'll be nice. It's fall, whatever. And the Chicago team was like, absolutely not. Like, it is cold by then. No one's going to show. And we realistically could have snow that weekend if we wanted to execute. Conversely, in September, it's still 110 degrees in Phoenix. And so when we were looking at September dates, which is when most of our walks are taking places in September, they were like, guys, it's too hot. Like, no one will want to be there. And you definitely don't want to be out there, schlepping boxes and running an event when it's 110 degrees outside, in the shade. And so we had to just adapt for these different communities. So, when we're looking to 25, we're thinking through that as part of the strategy with our dates. Like, okay, how should we maybe shift dates to better accommodate seasonality, to accommodate the day of the week, to accommodate the football schedule, which is real. Football is real. I'm not even going to discount that.
Or even accommodating other events in the market, as much as we want to, all play nicely together in the sandbox, right? Different nonprofits, but there's just reality of there's only so many venues. There's only or good venues. There's only so many, media partners or things like that, to where, choosing to have your event or pop up your event the same weekend as one that's been around for 20 years in that market So you've got to
Mhm.
factor that in again as you're expanding into a new city as well.
Absolutely. Well, and as we were thinking about other events, one of the things that we expanded upon when it comes to the Walk for Hope is historically this event only benefited the women's cancer program at the hospital. And one of the things we changed as we headed into 2024 is we actually opened up the event to now benefit all areas of the hospital. So it's not just a women's cancer event, it's an event for all cancers. If you look at our logo and if you look at our rebrand, it's very rainbow colored. We've got a lot of colors associated with it. That's intentional in order to represent the different types of colors that different cancers own. So, prostate cancer owns blue, pancreatic cancer owns purple, breast cancer owns pink, ovarian cancer owns teal. Like you'll see all of those colors represented in our branding. And so, as we're thinking about expansion or talking about expansion, for us, it wasn't just into different cities. It was also into different areas of the cancer space that we had not played before. And so when you bring up competitive events, this became a real thing. We wanted to make sure that our patients who oftentimes are participating in more than one event a year. I know we like to think they just belong to us, but
No.
the reality is they're part of this cancer community. If you're a breast cancer survivor, it's not uncommon for you to participate in Relay or to also participate in an event for Komen or to participate in an event for MD Anderson or for City of Hope. People who are philanthropically natured oftentimes participate in multiple events or fundraise for similar organizations work in the space. And so we don't want to necessarily compete with the mind share of our participants and having to split them between one walk that's happening one weekend and a similar walk that's happening the next weekend.
I think so often, people want to think, well, they're our supporters. We don't want them fundraising for somebody else. And the reality is we want to offer an amazing experience so that they want to fundraise for us, but they're not our donors. We're their cause. And when your cause is a certain type of cancer, you could want to fundraise for several different organizations. That was something during my time working at Make-A-Wish that we were very cognizant of, is that families who'd been granted a wish, yes, they wanted, they were willing to fundraise and want to give back to another child looking for a wish. But if their child had heart disease, they may also be fundraising for the American Heart Association. If their child had, pediatric cancer, they may also be fundraising for St. Jude or ACS or LLS. And that was okay. And to not let that eat away at our connection to them or feel like that was a barrier. So you mentioned expanding into the audience beyond women's cancers. We've talked about this. There's a lot of ways to expand your portfolio. Yeah. So if somebody is listening and they're thinking, okay, I know we need to grow, right? If you're not growing, you're dying, right? And you think about kind of how to expand your portfolio, whether it's new markets, new programs, new audiences, what advice, both from your time here at City of Hope and just your, years of experience, what advice would you give to someone who is thinking, it's time for us to add something new into the mix?
Programmatic expansion, I think, is an important thought for every organization. To your point, Marcy, if you're not expanding, if you're not growing, then you're dying. Or if you're stagnant, that will lead to decline. So, in my role here at City of Hope, we actually have been discussing, okay, what does it mean to take the walk to the next level? And what does it mean? My official title is national signature events. What's the next event? Right now it's the walk, but what's the next thing that we want to move forward with? And so we're actually doing some research right now on, would it make sense? I'm not going to say exactly what we're doing, but we're looking into what.
Come on, Robyn, tell us. Just kidding.
Maybe in a future podcast, you can bring me back in a little
for
bit.
Part 2.
Part 2. What would it make sense to expand into a different type of event? And does it make sense to take the walk to other markets where we don't have hospitals? Or does it make sense to expand the walk in smaller communities or micro communities like we're doing in LA, in those spaces where we do have a hospital? Walk is very accessible, but there are all different types of events, and people, the general population, is interested in all different types of things. We have doctors at the hospital that are hardcore runners and want a marathon or want some sort of running event. We also have folks who participate at the hospital that are cyclists and would love to see a cycling event. So there's a lot of different options. So as we're trying to decide what expansion means, we're trying to evaluate, okay, will it be a better investment to go into another geographic market? Or is it a better investment for us to look at a different type of program in the markets that we have a very good foundation in? So it's absolutely part of our strategy as we're moving forward to figure out, do we go to someplace we don't have a hospital, or do we stay in the markets where we do have hospitals and start a different type of fundraising program?
All too often, people, when they're thinking about a new program, they think, what's the next big thing? Oh, pickleball is really hot right now. Let's do a pickleball event. Or, we saw that huge surge with live streaming. And while we're still seeing it, we just had our last podcast episode on that about how it's, a totally new source of entertainment and marketing for us. But ultimately, it's about the audience. What audience are you trying to reach? And then what activity fits that audience instead of just choosing the activity, which I think is a small distinction, but a really important distinction that could save you from going down a path that just cannibalizes your existing efforts because the activity sounds cool or interesting.
Yeah. I like to think of it as like a trifecta, the Venn diagrams, where you'll have three circles that overlap one another. For a peer-to-peer person to get inspired, they have to love your mission or love your organization, one of those two things. They also have to have an interest in whatever activity it is, or willingness to participate in whatever activity it is that you're doing. And the third is they have to be willing to fundraise. All three of those things have to be in play in order for your program to be successful. And live streaming is actually a really good example. When I was working at Tiltify, we would see charities that be like, oh, this is the new hot, crazy thing we should be doing. And so they would start up the program, but they didn't have any people in that space to actually execute. And so they would end up struggling to build the audience because they didn't already have that group in place. So I think when we're talking about programmatic expansion in terms of new programs, you should evaluate as part of that process do we have a foundational group of people that can help us with executing? With a walk, anybody can walk. It's much easier. With a cycling program, do we have cyclists already interested who are willing to carry the mantle and make that their cause and champion it for you? Do you have gamers or live streamers already in the fold that are willing to kind of champion your event in their community? And so I think it's just really important as we're evaluating to make sure that there is some sort of foundational group of individuals, hopefully volunteers, that can help you with executing and building your presence in their community.
Exactly. Well, Robyn, I know you and I could talk about this for hours and hours, but we will spare the listeners and keep this to a relatively short episode. But where can people who want to learn more about what you're doing at City of Hope with Walk for Hope, where can we send them? How can people get involved?
Yeah. So the website's walkforhope.org. And like I said, we're 2 weeks away from our biggest series of events. I'm super excited about it. Would love for you to check it out. You're also welcome if you would like to check me out on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. A quick shout out to the amazingness of LinkedIn. I'm doing my own personal fundraising efforts for the walk right now, and posted posted a story on LinkedIn about my Walk for Hope fundraising and raised almost $1,000. And honestly, it just speaks to where we started at the beginning of this conversation. Like, we have an amazing community of people who work and have lived in this peer-to-peer and nonprofit space for their entire careers. And in this moment, they stepped up and supported me in a way that was just mind-blowing and made me so grateful for the contacts and the people that work in this space. So just wanted to end in a moment of gratitude for the support they've given me personally, and to the networks that we're all building with one another. So, please connect with me. I would love to become your friend, and I'll donate to your walk whenever you're doing something.
I love it. Well, Robyn, thank you so much for joining us. It's always such a pleasure to hear your insights and your just smart thoughts on the peer-to-peer space. And also thank you for recording this episode 2 weeks before your big event. I also appreciate that. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I appreciate it.
The P2P Soap Box is produced in partnership with True Story FM. Engineering by Pete Wright. Music this week is by Russo. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we hope you'll consider doing just that for our show. But the best thing that you can do to support the P2P Soap Box is simply to share the show with a friend or colleague. Thank you for listening.